Okay, so once again, the only way I can record this is on my webcam on my computer. So my graphs are going to show up backwards. Please follow along as much as you can. I will post pictures, links to pictures in the description below. So if you need to follow along that way, you can. Sorry for the inconvenience. For this assignment, I'm going to focus on expansionary and contractionary fiscal policy. I'm going to do one example from each that I found. So first we have expansionary fiscal policy, which is an increase in government spending or a decrease in taxation, which is also known as tax cuts. And this shifts the aggregate demand curve to the right, which is an increase. And it's typically used during recessions or when one is anticipated. The example that I found for this one is kind of dated, but please bear with me because I tried to make my two examples be kind of related. It's the Economic Stimulus Act of 2008. The article I found about it was on CNN, and basically Bush sent out a bunch of rebate checks to people, like in America, and it was like $600 for individual taxpayers and $1,200 for married taxpayers that filed joint tax returns, and it totaled to be about $152 billion. And Bush said that it would have an impact of about 1% of our national GDP, and he hoped to prevent the recession that was, everyone knew was coming by giving these people this extra money so they could go out and spend it, and help boost the economy. And this was known as an automatic stabilizer because it helped to stimulate aggregate demand in the economy and, help it get back up. So we're going to go to the graph. Once again, sorry, it's backwards. So this is the aggregate demand one. So I started it off over here at aggregate demand 1. That's just the initial one. And so the first shift that we're going to see to aggregate demand 2 is the initial $152 billion that was sent out. For the next shift, we're going to have to take into account the multiplier effect, which is in this corner, but I'll just verbally explain it. So the multiplier effect, you have to use the MPC, which was given to us, which is 0.93, and you put it in the little formula in order to find the multiplier. So that's 1 over 1 minus 0.93, which is also 1 over 0.07, and that equals 14.29, which is the multiplier. And then you multiply that by the initial change, 152 billion, and you get approximately 2,172. So if we come back to the graph, you'll see the next change from aggregate demand 2 to 3 is that it's practically $2 trillion. So it brings it all the way over here. It's a huge increase because of the multiplier effect. And next, we have to take into account the crowding out effect, which would bring us down to the second graph for interest rates. So basically, when there is a fiscal expansion, interest rates are going to increase. And this so far has been such a huge expansion. I put a huge increase in interest rates. So I did it from 0.3 to 0.8. So if you come over here to this graph, you see I have money supply set, just an equilibrium price. And then the money demand increases. It shifts to the right. So because of this increase in money demand, when we come back up here, aggregate demand is going to decrease down to this final one, aggregate demand 4, and that's going to be the end of it. So overall, GDP, which is down here, real GDP is going to increase. It starts off here, and it increases over time, and then because of the crowding out effect, it decreases, but it's still an increase from the initial amount. And just a little further explanation for this graph. I set the price level at also an equilibrium price, just to kind of make this graph look like the graphs on our notes, so it would be easier to understand for you guys. So next we have the contractionary policy, which is basically just the opposite of expansionary. It's a decrease in government spending or an increase in taxation, which is known as a tax hike. This shifts the aggregate demand curve to the left, which is a decrease, and it's used when high inflation rates are being anticipated, or when when the government's trying to slow down the economy. So the example I used for this was the topic that we recently did our essay over, which is when the Fed raised the interest rates in December of 2015. They increased it from the range of 0 to 0.25 up to 0.25 to 0.5. And I also found this article about this on CNN, just FYI. So basically, with this, we should expect interest rates on savers deposits to increase, and then also mortgage rates to increase. This interest rate increase was basically put out there, and they decided to do it because back in the recession, we really needed that expansionary policy to help our economy grow up. But over all these years, we've done so good with all these policies and all the things that have been put into action to help us that we don't really need that safety net anymore of low interest rates and, all that stuff. So we need to just start raising them, and get back to being just a normal, stable economy. So that's why the Fed decided to do this increase in interest rates. So when we come over to the graph, this one's a little more simpler. I did the same thing with the price level just to try to compare it to the graphs we have in class. So with this, you need to take into account the crowding out effect. And even though the note said that fiscal expansions cause an increase in interest rates, the specific example said that there is an increase in interest rates. So it's still applicable for the crowding out effect. So this was a increase from, I said the higher part of the range, so from 0.25 to 0.5, which as you can see is even over here on the money demand, it still increases money demand, but compared to the contractionary policy one, as you can see, it's a smaller shift because it was such a small increase in interest rates that it's a small shift. So when we come back up to the aggregate demand graph, we see that, like I said, contractionary policies cause aggregate demand to decrease, and so do higher interest rates. The aggregate demand curve shifted to the left and decreased. So overall, real GDP also decreased, but it's a small decrease because, like I said, it's a small interest rate shift. The sources I use, like I said, were two of my articles were from CNN, and then I also use Investopedia to get a little more information on expansionary and contractionary policies, and then obviously I also use the class notes. I will post the links to my different sources below, and then like I said in the beginning, I will also post the pictures of my graphs because my webcam shows them backwards. Also, sorry about that again. Thank you.